Thank you so much for having me here. I am very honored to be here. And before I get into my talk, I wanted to talk a little bit about the power of community. At Momento, one of the first things that we did was we wanted to build a company that revolves around the developer. And developers really flourish inside a community. It has been an extreme pleasure for us to see the power of community across Japan in the very early stages of our company. And this community has really helped us propel. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why we need community and why serverless needs a community. It is because of people in the community that really propel each other. We learn from each other, we teach each other, and we take inspiration from each other. And I wanted to say thank you to the organizers of this conference, and starting with Shingo-san. Shingo-san is a big inspiration. He is really fast, even when he's not behind the wheels of a Lamborghini. It's his favorite car. But he came up with the idea to think about doing an in-person serverless days again. And I just watched him from idea to then securing the venue, to then securing the speakers in a matter of a few days. And that velocity is really helpful for the community to have all of us benefit from gatherings like this. And then, of course, Hiromi-san, the hero from Osaka. And she has been a true inspiration for Momento as well. And she has been such a great organizer and to make this event successful and to make the community successful. And then Horike. I try to find pictures that capture the essence of each individual. And nothing says Horike more than this. He's always excited, happy, ready to supercharge everybody around him, and that includes this particular conference. And then, more importantly, the conference, other than the people who are here, it couldn't have been possible without the folks that gave us the venue. So I also wanted to quickly say thank you to Yokota-san and Class Method for hosting us on day one, and to Akinaga-san at Docomo Innovations Lab for the workshop hosting tomorrow. All right. So let's not forget our great speakers that came from all around the world. So especially the speakers who traveled across the world to be here. Alex and Eric from the United States, and Peter, who came all the way from Melbourne to be here. So thank you for coming, and thank you for sharing all the wisdom with the local community. All right, so Serverless Days Tokyo. So now I have to say something profound and hopefully something that you can learn from. My name is Khawaja. I started my career working at NASA on the Mars rovers. So I built the Mars rover. I used to work on the cameras, and I processed all of the images that would come down from Mars. Now, this particular rover was about the size of a car, landed on Mars on its wheels, and sends a lot of images every single day. Every single one of those images was stored, processed, and delivered from the cloud. Most of it were serverless services, even in the very early days. As Eric mentioned, serverless naming started around 2014, but there were plenty of serverless services back in the day. So as early as 2008, when I started using AWS, there was one SA for all of AWS at the time. And it was super early, but there were still serverless services back then. So SQS was around, S3 was around. And you could do a lot with just those two services when combined with the compute. In 2013, I joined Amazon. I used to run DynamoDB, which is a large NoSQL database. And then today, I'm a co-founder and CEO at Momento. Where we take a lot of our inspiration from is actually DynamoDB, which I feel changes the world one table at a time. And why does DynamoDB do that? It's because if you look at DynamoDB, you don't need to have a PhD in computer science or distributed systems to build a very large, highly available system. You just create the table and you start throwing loads at it, and it just works. Behind the scenes, all of that complexity of the number of nodes, the replication details, the number of partitions, it all kind of abstracts away in the background. And that allows the world to kind of speed itself up in its development and in production. And, to be able to hit over 100 million transactions per second for Amazon's Prime Day last year is a big deal, because the people, the developers who were benefiting from Dynamo, did not need to know any of those details about the underlying infrastructure. They were instead able to focus on their core business. And that's where we take our inspiration from with Momento. Our mission is to help developers become more productive and to ship better experiences for their customers faster. The Momento, one of the core differentiators for us is it's ready for scale, ready for production. So across the board, we see a lot of customers already using us in production at very large scale. And we're fortunate that many of our partners and customers are in Japan. So we, and we saw, I think we heard about Momento from the HTB talk today as well. Citus, CyberAgent, Konoris, all early users and early partners for Momento. So let's get into a little bit more about why serverless. So our hypothesis is that serverless gives you better availability, better security, and better scale. And why does it do that? It's because with serverless, a lot of the decisions that are available to you when you're making your own thing, they're already made for you. All the best practices are already there by default. So when you make a Momento cache today, you don't have the option to do multi-AZ versus single AZ. It's multi-AZ availability by default without you having to think about it. You don't have to worry about setting up authentication. It's there by default. You don't have to worry about encryption at rest, encryption in transit. It's already there by default. And you don't have to worry about scale. You don't have to worry about, can I handle 1 million TPS, because somebody else has already done the benchmarking and they've made that. They've ensured that that scale is actually available to you. So the essence of serverless is to minimize the number of boxes in your architecture diagram. And that is really important, because if you have fewer boxes in your diagram, then you can understand your system better, you can optimize your system better, and you can focus on the core business logic. So I like to play a little game called Count the Boxes. So this is what a server full caching environment looks like. So you see these boxes, and if you start looking at the boxes, there's actually a lot. Every shard or partition is a box. Every replica is a box. So you've got a box for availability zones, you got boxes for each shard, you got boxes for each replica, and then you got to get to the API servers, and then you have boxes for those, you have boxes for the load balancers, and so forth. And this is all before you have to worry about VPCs, maintenance windows, auto-scaling, authentication, TLS. It's a lot of things to worry about, and you just want to get going. So Momento Cache allows you to accelerate your app, to reduce the cost, and to reclaim your time. And why this matters is when developers are making a cache, when they're thinking about their end-to-end experience, what matters most to their end users is latency, availability, and cache hit rate. Those are the 3 things that matter. What they end up getting distracted by is the bottom half of the screen. It's how many shards do I need? What's my replication strategy? How many availability zones? Do I have hot partitions and hot keys? What does my clustering situation look like? What is my failover strategy? And do I have to worry about the cache going cold during deployments and during maintenance windows? That is a lot of things to worry about that don't impact your end users. And these are distractions that we try to take away. So we had a customer show up and they asked us, I'm running a feature store and I import about 1 billion items a day. Can Momento handle that? And you do some quick math, and because we're in this business, it's really easy for us to do that kind of math. 1 billion items a day is only about 1 million TPS. It's a little over 1 million TPS. That's not a lot. So we said, okay, but we don't want to just say we can do it. We just went during the call, we just said, okay, let's go ahead and turn on a load driver with a get to set ratio of 80 to 20 and use about 60 million items, so you can just do a lot of puts and then just do lots of gets. We use an open source tool for this called RPC Perf. RPC Perf is written entirely in Rust, and it's open sourced, so you can use it to benchmark against Memcache, against Redis, as well as against Momento. It's written out of Twitter. So we ran this test very quickly for our customer, and you see what happens. It's one thing to make claims, it's the other to just pull up the charts and show what the end user result looks like. And what you see here in this orange line is the 99.9 percentile latency. It stays between 4 to 6 milliseconds. Now, you have to be very careful. This is not your average latency, which is what a lot of the, if you want to make your benchmark look good, you talk about the average. If you actually care about your customers, you don't settle for average. You look at your tail latency. So at 99.9 percentile is what you really want to be paying attention to, and you want that tail latency to be as static as possible. Then we also have Momento Topics, which is it's a pub sub system, and it's meant to push to unlimited number of channels without any WebSocket management. So one of the other things that we notice developers getting distracted by when they're making pub sub applications is not only do you have to set up the caching cluster for doing the pub sub, but then you also have to deal with API gateway and WebSockets or run your own system. It's a lot of work to run at scale, and it gets really expensive. And what we really wanted to do was to kind of collapse that box into one. So we get asked this a lot. How is Momento Topics, which is our pub sub service, different than SNS? SNS is meant for more back-end services, and it polls for updates. And it requires management of the topics and the subscription. You have to add a whole bunch of stuff if you want to connect it for devices. Momento Topics is meant for both back-end and front-end services. So you can connect a mobile device directly to Momento Topics. And it's built for scale. So millions of requests, millions of connections, and you get that instant low latency notification. And this pub sub works out of the box, and it doesn't matter how many subscribers you have. It just, it just works. And we see customers like Zigzag Games, another Japanese gaming company, that run their entire chat applications on Momento. You can use the cache to store the chats, and you can use the topics to notify people when they get a brand new message. And again, we had a customer show up and say, hey, I've got, almost 4 million subscribers. Can you handle that scale? And we said, I don't know, let me try. And we tried, and there's a blog about how this got set up. And one thing that we learned is in this whole process, there's 0 WebSockets, and it's coming directly from the device to Momento. And again, going back to the numbers, so the published latency at 99.9 percentile with this many subscribers is still sitting very static at 3.3 milliseconds. And the subscriber latency is a little bit slower, but still, P39s is sitting around 4.3 milliseconds. How do we make that happen? This is the end-to-end architecture for Momento. This is inspired by how Twitter, Facebook, and Amazon build their services. It's a 2-tier architecture. So in this 2-tier, we use the network load balancer on AWS. We really like network load balancer. It's really cool because it's basically a load balancer at the TCP level. We don't terminate SSL on it. The SSL termination happens at our routing layer. So as far as the NLB is concerned, it's just forwarding TCP packets. We use the gRPC as our protocol, which allows customers, the clients, to actually use very few connections to do a lot of throughput. And the NLB just forwards the requests over to one of our request router nodes. We call them MR2s, inspired by the famous Japanese car, MR2, which we really like, but it also stands for Momento Router. So anyways, the request comes to the routing layer. The routing layer terminates SSL. It does the authentication, and it knows where the data is stored based on the customer and the name of the cache that it's being routed to. And it routes the data over to the appropriate cache nodes in one of the AZs. The cache nodes is where the data is stored, and it's replicated across multiple AZs by default without you having to kind of worry about it. The most beautiful part, though, is you can scale the routing layer and the storage layer completely independently. And so if you have a lot of data but not a lot of throughput coming in, you don't need very many routers. But if you have very little data but lots of TPS that's happening, you need more routers. Luckily, these are details that our customers never have to think about, but these are details that we build and optimize for internally. So we take on the boxes on our side, so there's no boxes on your side. So let's dive in a little bit deeper as to why the independent scaling is important. Our secret weapon, what powers Momento, is really the MR2, the request router that we have. And it takes care of a few things on behalf of our customers. So the first one is hotkey mitigation. So what happens is if you have a cache, but you got one key that's really, really popular, in a traditional serverful caching environment, what that would do is it would put all the load on one of the boxes. And that box becomes under duress, and that box might tip over. And if you have that happen during production, the only thing you can do is to scale up vertically your entire fleet. You can try to remodel your data, but that's not something you're going to do during an incident. That's going to take weeks. So you can just scale up your entire cluster to the size that it takes to support your busiest shard. And sometimes the largest instance can't handle it. And at that point, you're done. You can't really do anything. So what the Momento routers do is when we detect that a key is hot, they instantly start to make copies of the key inside of the routing layer. And we do it for a very, very short period of time. But it allows us to provide fan-out support. So if you've got one key that is hot, it doesn't matter. We just absorb it for you. And this is all automatic. It's things that you don't have to think about. The end-to-end TLS encryption is there. This is also nice. It handles millions of connections concurrently. So one of the downsides or a weakness that Lambda exposed in a lot of servers is in a traditional EC2 instance, when you are running a web server, that web server might have a connection pool of 20 connections to your underlying database and to your cache. But despite having just 20 connections, it might be handling hundreds or maybe even thousands of requests concurrently. In a Lambda environment, each Lambda is typically handling one request. And to handle that one request, it's making one connection to your cache or your database. And when people get into high throughput, high concurrency Lambda scenarios, they end up creating a lot of connections to their database, to their caches. Now, if you're using Dynamo, you would never know that this is a problem because Dynamo also has a request router and it doesn't care if you open one connection or a million. But if you're using Redis or if you're using MySQL, you might actually be surprised because when lots of connections start to open, it slows down your cache. And it gets worse if you're doing transport layer security. So if you have SSL turned on, the cost to make the new connection gets really, really bad. And do you know when you make a lot of connections? It's right when traffic spikes. Lots of Lambdas show up. They all go and they say, let's make a new connection to your Redis node. And your Redis node, the poor single-threaded Redis, says, oops, I can't. And you have no mitigation at that point. You can add more replicas, but then it's really, really manual, and you have to pay for them all the time. And you're basically paying for peak capacity for concurrency. So that's completely handled by the routing layer in S3 and Dynamo and Facebook's McRouter, this routing layer is really magical in terms of being able to scale out the number of connections. And then the bottom two are really, really important, is that we recently launched an HTTP server support, so you can access Momento items with HTTP. And you can have fine-grained access control. So you can create a key with Momento and say this key only has access to, or this token has access to only this cache or a particular key in that cache. And the reason why it's powerful is now if you need to access an image that's sitting inside of Momento or a sorted set, you don't need a Lambda and API gateway. You can just go to Momento and say, can I please have this item? And I have a token that proves that I have the access rights to get it. This particular capability is actually what separates S3 and DynamoDB. S3 has a web server. So if you load an object in S3, you can actually download it in your browser. But if you're using Dynamo, you need to configure either a Lambda and API gateway or a service proxy via API gateway. You have to think about it. And we wanted to do one step further. So with Momento, you can just use HTTP and load items directly from your browser to Momento. And if you go back to the game of count the boxes, this gets really bad with topics or with pub/sub capabilities, because what we learned with some of our gaming customers that were doing large-scale publish and subscribe is they have all of these extra lambdas to manage their WebSockets, to manage the pushes, and to manage who's coming in, who's leaving, and they're managing these tables. And then behind the scenes is this Redis cluster that is actually doing the pub/sub. It's a lot of boxes. And with Momento, it's just clients. They're talking to Momento topics, a subscriber management, the HTTP server, the fan out, the TLS, all of that is baked into here, and you just never have to worry about WebSockets. And it is an incredibly efficient protocol as well with gRPC. And then lastly, we have the Momento Vector Index. This is out in beta. I think people care a lot recently about AI and generative AI. One of the fundamental components that is powering AI is vector searching. And vector searching is changing the way people interact with computers. And it's making computers interact more like real humans with us. Today, when I go to a traditional search engine, and if I ask for something, it gives me that exact thing back. Whereas what vector searches allows you to do is to say, hey, do you have something that looks similar to this? So I'll give you a quick example. If you take a picture of me right now, and you take another picture of me right away, like literally 1 second later, and you ask the computer, are these two pictures the same? And the answer is going to be no. Even though you didn't change anything, I didn't move, the answer is going to be the same because the light might be a little bit different. You might catch me at a different frame behind me on the TV, and it will say, nope, these two pictures are of two different people, or they are two very different pictures. Whereas with a vector search, you say, are these two pictures similar to each other? And the answer is going to be yes. And when you think hard about what that enables for the world, is when you're shopping, you're not looking for that exact item. You might use a different word to talk about that item. And you will still find it even though you didn't use the exact right word. When you're looking through your knowledge bases to handle a ticket, you can find something that you didn't describe quite appropriately, but you still stumble upon it because it's an approximation search. And this is much, much closer to how humans interact with each other. And this actually facilitates discovery. Because when I talk to a human, I ask them the same question multiple times. They're not giving you an exact answer. They're searching for something that is close to what you talked about. And sometimes, even though you didn't intend to ask the question, they answer something different. And that discussion leads to more discovery and more innovation. So that's what vector searching is doing for the whole industry, for enabling search. So Momento we built our first serverless vector engine. And we literally tried to make it as simple as we possibly could. And it's got two components. You build the index. And well, let's take a look at the code real quick. Client.addItemBatch. Right? You've created the index, and you just insert these vectors. Everything behind the scenes, number of nodes, with indexing algorithm, everything is taken care of. And then there's search. And then there you're just saying, find me the top nearest matches for this particular vector. And you can pass in 5, 10, 100, however many approximate neighbors you're looking for. So we're trying really hard to make vector searching really, really easy. And the one other difference here is that this isn't something that just runs on your laptop. When you're done with the application, it's already online, and it can already handle the scale. So the goal is to make it instant, to make it be online, to make it scale, and to be ready for production. The service is in beta right now. You can sign up for a preview. And if you go to our workshop tomorrow, you will get to play with it as well. So tomorrow in Odaiba at 1:30 p.m., Momento has a workshop led by, is it Erica and Shingo? And Koidabashi-san. They will be there. They are the more technical people, so you can learn from them. And it's at 1:30. And here's the QR code that you can scan to get more information. You'll get to play with Momento Cache, Momento Topics, and you'll get to learn a little bit about vector indexes with a hands-on tutorial. Thank you so much for having me. I cut my presentation to only 30 minutes so that we can start the after party sooner. Look forward to that is my one gift to everybody, so we can start the after party sooner. Thank you again for having me. Thanks to everybody who helped organize and all the speakers.